Well, thank you so much. I appreciate all of you who have stayed. I also appreciate all the conference organizers for inviting me to this opportunity because I'm really new at telling this story. So I am not as good as the Painterland sisters. Everyone, they did amazing. But I want to tell you a story about drones and what I've been learning and where I think things are going with technology, whether it's regenerative or conventional agriculture. To give you a little bit of background about myself, I grew up at a feed store. I didn't grow up on a ranch. I grew up at a feed store serving farmers and ranchers in my community in a very conventional way. We sell seed, we sell fertilizer. My dad's had this feed store for 51 years. It's been in our family, and yeah, I guess you could say I kind of grew up eating sweet cob and dog food to some degree. But what really changed the trajectory of my career path is I went to a Society for Range Management range camp for high school students when I was 14 years old. And my family has always been involved in agriculture. My grandpa moved and started managing a ranch in Nevada in the 1950s, well, no, before that, the 1940s. And, but learning about rangeland plants and range animals and more about the ranchers that we had been serving at the feed store for years just really resonated with me, and I've been in the rangeland profession ever since. I've been a rangeland specialist with NRCS. I've been a rangeland consultant, helping farmers and ranchers evaluate their properties and be able to communicate to their regulatory agencies why they should continue grazing. And then I've gone on to teach in higher ed rangeland and animal science courses for the last 17 years. So I know what it's like to be the last speaker right before either the end of the day or right before lunch. So I'll try to be as quick as possible. I'm now transitioning into extension work. I was recently hired as the state livestock extension specialist here in Nevada, and but I also have been working on a lot of research. I started my PhD in animal and rangeland science in 2019, and I've been funded by the U.S. Forest Service for the last 5 years, so they've been providing the financial support for me to learn all about drones on rangelands. CTEMPS is an organization that handed me my first drone to fly for research. Nevada View is a remote sensing group that's provided some financial support, and through my work with my colleagues, I started the Drone Rangers. So, I was gonna ask you to picture a drone before I did that. I should follow my notes. Okay, now that you've seen a military drone, picture another drone in your head. I knew I would do that too. All right. Can you think of another drone? Maybe you have some drones at home, right? There's military drones. The war in Ukraine has definitely elevated the idea of drones in people's mind. But maybe your favorite movie scene was shot with a drone. Do we have some action movie fans? Those people who love watching the cars fly through the air and explode, right? A lot of that is captured using drones nowadays. Maybe you've had some fun family experiences watching a drone show. I've only seen them on TV. I've never seen a real drone show yet in person. One day. But they've really quickly become part of our everyday lives. I was just watching skiing on TV while I was eating breakfast in the hotel, and there's a drone following every skier around while they're doing their half-pipe tricks. And so maybe, just raise your hands, how many of you have a drone and you do use it? Not as many as I would have thought. What about your 11-year-old child? Your grandchild? Yeah, they're getting really popular. So I'm gonna talk about the Drone Rangers and who we are, give you a little background of history of how we started using drones in land management, talk about Sorry, I'm getting some feedback. Oh, okay. All right, I just didn't want it to be me causing the weird noise. All right, I'm going to talk about some of the current technologies and capabilities for pasture and rangeland monitoring using drones, some of the limitations, and I'm going to kind of, since I am your last speaker before your discussion, I'm going to really focus on the future. You guys have been doing an amazing job. You should all pat yourself on the back, all of the hard work that you're doing. Let's talk about how that might look in the future. So we're going to get to that. Here's a little peek of our Drone Rangers Weebly blog that we have. You can find us on dronerangers.weebly.com, .weebly.com. And what we are is a woman-led team of drone pilots, rangeland scientists, and educators that are passionately sharing resources about drones and science. We founded this volunteer organization of women. We founded it because people really wanted to know more about drones. People very passionately like, tell us about what you're doing. We love drones. We want to know more about this. And not to throw all my male scientist colleagues under the bus, but they would never go do the educational events when requested. And so we said, oh, we'll do it because we love this and we're passionate about it. So my colleagues, this is Hannah Potts, and on the left, Sarah Van Nest. We founded Drone Rangers and just started telling the world about our research and using drones. Where it all started was with some radical rangeland ecologists who were like, you know, we need really high quality aerial imagery to track rangeland changes over time. And so Dr. Terry Booth, who was an agricultural research service scientist, he started flying ultralights at 100 to 300 feet off the ground at near stall speed to capture this 1 centimeter pixel imagery. Does that sound terrifying to anyone else? Yeah, they crashed a few planes, no one died, but we have to be very cognizant that sometimes science is actually pretty dangerous, and believe it or not, 66% of all wildlife biologist deaths on the job are aviation related, and most wildland firefighter deaths are also aviation related. So anytime we can put drones in the sky instead of humans just for doing science, we're probably saving some lives over time. Well, if you want to know more about drones, we use acronyms. It's a very jargon-centric scientific endeavor, just like a lot of science is. And we use the terms UAV, UAS, and SUAS to describe not just the drone, but the sensor, the controller, all the things that go into flying an actual drone, because it's not just the vehicle that's flying around. So that's one way to find information about drones. Another way is through precision agriculture or precision livestock farming. I say these words and you may say, that's not regenerative. Only big corporate farms are doing precision agriculture, but I don't think that's true. Actually, I think it doesn't matter whether you're regenerative or conventional. I think you can use the principles of precision agriculture to make management decisions regardless of your production system. So the International Society for Precision Agriculture recently changed their definition as a process that gathers, processes, and analyzes temporal, spatial, and individual plant and animal data and combines it with other information for improved resource efficiency, productivity, quality, profitability, and where it fits here too, sustainability of agricultural production. So I work in this area of precision livestock farming, precision agriculture as well, because we track a lot of individual plant and animal data. What's unique about being a researcher in the realm of drones and aerial imagery is that it's a practically brand new field of science in terms of using the drones. Drones and pasture land, this is a publication from this year. They were tracking how many papers have been published looking at pasture lands and drones. And, people have only been doing this science for the last 10 years. Almost no scientist gets to say that. It's super fun. And in terms of overall crop and agricultural production, when you look at the use of drones for monitoring crops and agriculture, a lot of the papers just started getting put out in 2009, with a lot more coming out 2015, 16. China and India lead the world in terms of the amount of science that's being published in this area, with the United States being close behind them. So I want to talk about some of our drone technologies and how they might be useful for you communicating your story to your consumers about how you're changing the land. Okay, that's sometimes difficult to do because some of you are like, well, I'm not a professional scientist, I don't collect that kind of data, but my goal is we'll get you there. So, what can we do? Well, all plants reflect sunlight. They take in sunlight, they photosynthesize, but they also reflect sunlight. And different plant species reflect the sunlight in different ways and across the different spectra. So what you can see here, I don't know, my pointer may or may not work, is I have different spectra, and each different plant on our rangeland environment has a slightly different reflection in the different spectra, whether it's blue, green, red, and in the non-visible light of red edge and near infrared wavelengths. And so we can take the heights of these plants and their different spectra and differentiate them on the rangeland. And I know some of you who are colorblind, you can't read this. It's going to be gross. And it's a little gross anyways, but this helps you understand that rangelands are really complex, and we have a lot of different cover classes on our rangelands. But essentially, using all those different spectra, we can start every area that we fly, we can classify it into its different cover classes, and then we can track those things over time. So when we implement a grazing practice, are we reducing bare ground? Or weirdly in Nevada, which I didn't talk a lot about Nevada yet, but Nevada's weird. We have more invasive species, I feel like. Maybe Hawaii has more than we do, but we're right up there on the list. We fight invasive species as almost one of our number one activities on rangelands. And all that purple you see is cheatgrass, Bromus tectorum. It's cheatgrass and cheatgrass litter. And so what I've been studying is using targeted grazing rather than chemicals to try to break up that litter layer and promote our perennial grass species and our perennial shrub species over this invasive annual grass. So, but back to the story about monitoring and tracking cover, wouldn't you love to be able to show people that over your first 5 years of starting regenerative grazing, you reduce bare ground by this much? That's what the story drones can help us tell. And we can do it with really high accuracy. This particular classification was 90% accurate over all of the classes with different accuracy rates for slightly different plants. Sagebrush is kind of easy because it has a very bluish kind of color to it, makes it a little easier to classify. But traditional rangeland monitoring techniques are not any better than this. If we can get 90% accuracy on running transects for characterizing our rangelands, that's about as good as we typically get. So, and this is just to zoom in a little bit and show you, like, each little yellow dot is a rock. Like, this is centimeter pixel size data. So, and sadly, the little tiny pink parts, I don't think my laser, like, up in that corner underneath the legend, those are our only perennial grasses on this little landscape. So we have a lot of work to do on our invasives. All right. We can also scale drone data with other data sources from remote sensing products, whether it's aerial photography or satellite data. And so how I do that is we use some marking paint that degrades pretty quickly over time, and we mark out transects and plots. We take pictures of them, we fly the drone over them, and then we clip and weigh everything to look at what the productivity of each of those individual plots are, and then we can scale that up across our different plots to different products. And the one here on the far right is a USGS product that estimates the cover of annual herbaceous grasses in our environment. And they produce this product 2 times a year for us, usually in May and July. And so it's a really fast way to start scaling up to the landscape level, because we can't, currently we can't always fly all of our drones over the entire pasture. Another thing weird about Nevada actually, on average, our producers actually have more cattle per ranch than any other state. Our ranches are really large. It is not uncommon for our ranchers to be managing 100,000 acres across private and public lands. That's one range con at a Bureau of Land Management office or a U.S. Forest Service office may be responsible for managing over 1 million acres. So that's kind of a hard thing to wrap your head around, and why I like drones a lot. So that helps give you a little context. All right, we can look at the density and the greenness of plants, which tells us a lot about their vigor. On your left is an RGB stitched orthomosaic of some hayland and some rangeland next to it. And so when we do vegetation indices, like the normalized difference vegetation index, but there's lots of other ones, the leaf chlorophyll index, you name it, we can look at health and vigor of our plants. It can help us in classifying our different vegetation types. And some of these can be done real time with the drone. Our multispectral drones that we fly, if we wanted to do pasture scouting, we could do real-time NDVI mapping while we're out flying it, and immediately find areas that, if we were doing crop scouting or something like that, that are less vigor, that may be nutrient stressed or may have other challenges. I have a couple colleagues that I worked on putting together this presentation, Wyatt Ghetto and Ian Spratling, and this is some Mavic 3 multispectral imagery. This is a RGB orthomosaic, but you can see, you can control the amount of information you get in terms of pixel resolution to match the size of the vegetation you have. In Nevada, our vegetation is small, unless it's basin wild rye. That's our one big grass, but most of our grasses are very small. Cheatgrass is like 7 to 10 inches tall. So we fly drones usually pretty low elevation and in that 1 centimeter pixel range, but if your vegetation's bigger and more dense, you might be able to get away flying with 5 centimeter pixels and things like that. I've also been playing around with flying our plots before and after our targeted grazing treatments. And if, for those of you who are in the workshop, when you fly drone photogrammetry, if you capture enough overlap between every single photo you take, I do 80% overlap front and back, I can develop a 3D model using the photogrammetry software of the vegetation and then difference the 3D models between before and after grazing. And the blue here is getting at the areas where the sheep removed vegetation during our targeted grazing treatment. So we can get into some grazing utilization. Let's see if this one works. I don't know, you may have to push the video button. No, yeah, let's go back. Let's see if it'll start. It's always risky putting videos into a presentation. But this is a video from one of my colleagues at the University of Nevada, Reno, in the Robotic Workers Lab. Dr. Papa Christos has a PhD student who's been doing real-time mapping of vegetation and classification. And he does this using a computer vision model. If you've never heard of computer vision before, what it does is you take a huge database with thousands of pictures of all the plants that you're interested in classifying, and you use a really high resolution camera, and then he's also using LiDAR at the same time, and he can simultaneously classify in real time while he's flying over these sagebrush rangelands each of the different species that are out there and the shrub volume. So for fuels mapping, and we really care about fuels, wildfire is one of our biggest issues in Nevada, impacts our permittees and our ranchers in an enormous way, 250,000 acre way, things like that. This is a really cool tool for us for doing fuels management. Okay, at least this video will work. Okay, what about spraying weeds? You're like, oh, that's not a regenerative practice. If we can get down to using less spray, though, that's helpful. And drones that can carry payload like this are really helpful for people to transition to spot spraying and using far less chemical. They can also be used for seeding. My co-author for this presentation, Ian Spratling, this is his spray drone. This is a very small one. Wyatt Ghetto has 2 of them now that are even bigger and can carry 15 gallons of product. They can actually, they have so much lift capability, they can pick up a 250-pound human. I don't recommend it. It's not FAA approved. Don't let the drone fly you across to the other end of the field. I don't recommend you pick up your husband from the tractor this way for lunch yet, okay? But there are daredevils who are doing this kind of thing. But these drones can be used for all sorts of things, variable rate nutrient application, any kind of more natural nutrient that you need to apply. These drones have become a lot, they're a new step for us in Nevada to get towards spraying less. So for us, I asked both Wyatt and Ian, I was like, how are you justifying the cost to the people that you're using the spray drones? You know, your clients, how is that working? And they said, well, less product makes it pay for itself right off the bat. We go out, we map where the weeds are, and we only spray the place where there's weeds. Or only spray the amount of nutrient application that's needed instead of the entire pasture. So that's working. Compared to doing ground spraying, they've noticed that they have way better calibrated equipment using these drones than ground sprayers. And so they're able to get a better application of the product, way less overspray. And they're finding that the big benefit for us in Nevada and in reducing the amount of chemicals that we're using on our agricultural lands is being able to finally go spray where our soils are too wet to get equipment out. Anyone else buried their tractor up to the axle in the mud before? Right? The drone's not going to get stuck in the mud, and we can get our foliar applications on at the right time finally. So we're increasing the effectiveness when we do treat, because weeds are one of our biggest problems. So they're finding that they can charge very competitive rates to traditional ground spraying, as long as they're applying whatever it is, whether it's a nutrient application or some kind of herbicide, at less than 6 gallons per acre. If the application has to be more than 6 gallons per acre, they start losing the cost-benefit ratio to using the drones. Drones can also be used for monitoring all the critters. Jonathan talked about how important it is to know what all of your biodiversity is out there, not just your plants. And this is Hannah Potts, one of the co-founders of the Drone Rangers, and she's currently working during her master's degree to use microphones on a drone to listen for squirrels, an endangered ground squirrel at an Air Force base in the Mojave Desert. These ground squirrels live in the ground, so you typically have a hard time counting them otherwise, and so they're finding this to be a really effective way. Also, thermal cameras, night vision sensors on drones are really effective for counting number of animals and critters that are out there, especially at the night or early morning hours when there's a lot more temperature differentiation between the animal and the ground. So don't just, again, I am not a full-time farmer or rancher. I just help. We have 3 different university farms that I help work on. But Ian and Wyatt are and have been in their families working as farmers and ranchers for a long time here in Nevada. Ian here said that before they were using drones, they were using airplanes to apply herbicide to their meadows. And the drift was killing the willows on the ranch. And so when they switched to spot spraying, they've been able to increase the biodiversity in their meadows. The willows are doing a lot better, and they're seeing a real huge bump in all those perennial forbs within their meadows. Wyatt, who owns Desert Oasis Spray Services in Fallon, Nevada, he said that when he goes out with the big spray drones, right, there's a lot of shock and awe factor from the public, because these drones are, I mean, I can't really get my arms all the way around, like, how big their wingspan is. But the farmers he works with are usually pretty excited, and they're like, oh, if only my dad or grandpa could have seen this and known that we're going to have these technologies. And the farmers he's been working with can immediately see how beneficial this is to their agricultural production, their overall diversity on the farm, by not spraying everything anymore. And it's going to be a big part of keeping small farms alive. Let's see if we can play this one. This is Wyatt talking about what he's excited about in the way that drones are going. Thank you for your help.
The thing that I see the biggest potential moving forward in the future for drones is definitely the efficacy of the batteries. Right now, the batteries, they work. They're not that efficient. You do have to have a pretty ample amount of power on board. And so as the battery technology grows, which it already is, and being able to keep these drones in the air for longer and having them be able to pack more payload is going to dramatically increase the efficiency and put the drones in a place where now we can start keeping up with a rotorcraft or a fixed wing ag operation.
So there's a lot of opportunity, and the technology has just changed dramatically in the 5 years since I've been involved in flying drones. I'll try to finish up as quick as possible here. So there are some limitations, right? There are major startup costs to getting involved in either mapping your pastures with drones or needing to spray or seed or apply some kind of foliar cover, even if it's organic, using drones. The battery life does cause some acreage limitations, and there's a very short technology turnover. Those of you who buy into the new iPhone every release understand that the drone market's not that different. There's also a lot of data security concerns, especially around foreign-made drones like DJI products. Congress has been submitting bills every year over the last several years to ban the DJI products. There's a lot of infrastructure and storage needed for the data that we collect with the drones, and all of these things combined can sometimes make it hard for farmers to make that first investment. So the path forward I see, or one of the paths forward in using these technologies, and I wear this extension hat now, is clearly working with groups of farmers and or working through conservation and weed districts, young entrepreneurial farmers, or in cases when you're doing crops and livestock, maybe working through your crop advisor, as having them be the drone pilots and the groups that own the drones and maintain the licensures. That might be the best way to roll out these technologies rather than expecting every farmer to try to get into flying drones on their own. And then we also haven't yet formalized the data monitoring protocols and the way that we deliver trend analysis to producers. And lastly, we really need a lot of time working with farmers and ranchers for them to tell us what kind of reports they need. You know, what is actionable, what changes their management, and what's easy for them to read and understand. So we want to move forward. I really don't expect drones to go away. We're in the fourth industrial revolution. You're starting to see it with machine learning, artificial intelligence, sensors all over the farm, increased sampling all over the farm. And I think drones are going to be a key to help us continue to collect data and manage pastures and rangelands in a more resilient way. We're going to be using drones, machine learning to increase our agricultural efficiency. But I have a huge challenge for you, and this is going to dictate where the future of this really goes, I think, is that there's still big questions about who's going to own and manage the data collected from these farms. What level of data sovereignty are farmers going to have moving forward? Satellites can collect a lot of high-quality data down to about 3-meter resolution, depending on the platform. And farmers don't own that. And depending on who you hire to collect your drone data, right, may have really big implications for government regulation in the future, things like that. So I'm just trying to my passion and my mission is to teach people about drones as much as I can, start producing the kind of cookbooks and handouts and classes and workshops and everything that everyone needs so that hopefully farmers get to be part of this conversation and not large multinational corporations or foreign governments that are going to control your data. So I ask you to think about this when you go home and you start thinking about the role of technology. Keep in mind that I just showed you 2 young farmers who are going to stay in agriculture because they're using these technologies and they're making them valuable to their neighbors. Maybe you have children or grandchildren on your farm or ranch that this is like right up their alley. They want to do this too. But I want you to think about, is this going to be a grassroots data collection effort? Would you work together with your neighbors to keep it local, or will the large multinational companies take over? And I don't know the answer to that, so I can't wait to hear your questions and your thoughts on that. Thank you for your time.
All right, I think we have time for a few questions. I'm actually going to start with a question. Is right to repair an issue with drones?
There is no repair, for the most part. I shouldn't say no repair. The US-made drones do have often more options available. Actually, sometimes you can't even get them working until you solder stuff together yourself. So DJI equipment tends to be a lot more integrated, and there's almost no way to work on it yourself. And the FAA wouldn't want you to. So in terms of drone safety, it is a challenge because we have to follow FAA regulations for aircraft and what's recommended by the manufacturer. And if you do anything outside of what the manufacturer has recommended, your insurance company may not cover what happens when you crash.
Thanks. All right, let's see. Yeah, right here. Yeah, okay, cool.
Hey, I'm just wondering, maybe you covered this and I missed it, but I'm wondering about, are farmers purchasing individual drones for their operations that they have going, or are there emerging kind of options for people, like communities, to be leasing drones and having like drone share in their community, or how is that all unfolding?
That's a great question. This is where I'm envisioning a future path forward. I follow a lot of regenerative grazing like groups online, and I have noticed a lot of ranchers investing in drones that they can just take video and demonstrate how their daily, or some of these farmers are using 4 times a day moves across their pastures, and they're trying to capture that aerial view of the imagery so they can communicate to others what they're doing. So those drones you can get in for about like $2,000, and you can get a pretty high quality drone. But for actual photogrammetry mapping, you're gonna be a lot higher cost. And that's where I see conservation districts, weed districts, cooperatives. I think a great model will be a conservation district model, where the conservation district employee is the pilot, and the farmers essentially hire them out, just like if they wanted to lease a piece of equipment from the conservation district to go collect the data for them and to process the data and hand it back to them in a report format that works good. So yeah, I would love to see it go that way. But farmers have to be bought into that.
While the microphone is running to the next person in the audience, I'm going to ask a virtual question. And it's actually a 2-part question. Have you seen use of drones to seed steep or rocky or otherwise difficult to access areas, 1? And then have drones been used with speakers for remote predator control?
That's a great virtual question. I actually met someone at this conference who came to my workshop Wednesday. On Tuesday, she was at a drone workshop for using microphones to deter predators on drones. Weirdly, during the pandemic in China and in other countries in Europe, they used microphones on drones to yell at people to go home and get out, stop congregating. It was gross. But yeah, so they can be used in a lot of different ways. I have a former student who has a 600 head operation in Montana, and it's pretty much just him, and when he can get his mom to come out with him and move cows, and he put a microphone on his little drone, and he goes and yells at the cows and gets them moving into the next pasture. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities there. The battery life is my concern for predator control. Most of our drones are designed to swap batteries every 20 minutes or so. So I don't know how much predator control you're going to do with that kind of battery swapping. And remind me, what was the other
The other
part?
one was seeding steep or hard to reach areas.
Yes, so Ian, that I've been working with, Ian does seed parts of the ranch that are difficult. The other great place for seeding is clay pans, where it would be a difficult soil type to get out there and pull a drill across, or very rocky areas like the person asked. So yes, they're great for seeding, and Ian's been using it that way for about 5 years.
Great, thanks. I don't know where the microphone went, but whoever has it, go for it.
It's funny that we just were talking about using the microphone to talk to the cows, because my question is, have you seen a lot of people using drones to monitor livestock, and also have there been any concerns about animal stress? We had someone come out to our farm for just like a documentary thing, and we're using drones, and it really stressed our sheep and some of our cows. And so like, do you have farmers and ranchers having concerns over that and the potential uses of using drones for livestock monitoring?
Yes, so this same former student of mine has also fit a mobile LiDAR unit, like almost twice the size of this, on, similar to an iPhone or an iPad, but onto the bottom of a drone, and he scanned livestock to look at body morphology as yearlings and two-year-olds are growing out. There's tons of different ways that you can use drones for monitoring grazing behavior, for counting livestock, or in Nevada, I really want to be counting wild horses using drones, because currently we use a lot of helicopters for that, which is even more stressful than the drone for the horses. What we've seen with wildlife studies is you can habituate the animals to the sound of the drone, but it does take time, and usually you just don't want to get too close. We've seen that if we get too close to the sheep with the drone, they definitely react to it, and we just try to stay out of their bubble because they do have a bubble on the drone. Fixed wing aircraft are much quieter and can be a potential solution to in terms of counting and monitoring livestock, finding them out on rangelands before going to gather. That's another thing our producers will love using fixed wing aircraft for is scouting for their cattle, because a lot of our producers, it takes them 2 weeks to round up all the cattle in October when it's time to come off the range. I know that seems weird for some people, but that's it can take a while to find them all. So I hope that answered your question.
Maybe we'll take one more from this side of the audience and a virtual question.
Thank you for your talk. I had a quick question about hyperspectral sensors, and if you see that coming down the pike for drones, and a follow-on is just, do you think that increased spectral resolution would be useful in rangeland monitoring?
Yes, so if I understood correctly, you're wondering if hyperspectral sensors would be useful for rangeland mapping. And yes, they're great. Instead of a multispectral drone like iFly has an RGB camera and 5 other bands, red, green, blue, red edge, and near infrared, a hyperspectral sensor will have up to 260 bands of spectral. It slices the electromagnetic spectrum into 260 slices. And yes, you can get even, so when I think about like grassland pastures in a state not like Nevada, if you really wanted to know how much of your pasture is Kentucky bluegrass versus C4 grasses and C3 grasses, and maybe you have a wide diversity of grasses, but they all look pretty green, they're all managed really well, that's when hyperspectral sensors are going to get us that kind of change in cover in those kind of grass situations. A lot of our rangelands don't need it, especially if we can time our multispectral collections with the phenology changes of the plant. Usually that's as effective and a fraction of the cost. Just to let you know, like the hyperspectral sensor that I have costed out for a grant application and the vehicle to put it on was close to $250,000. The insurance annually is almost $50,000.
Wow. So our last online question is, what are laws regarding flying drones over other people's property? And I'm going to add in here on or over public lands, because I think there's a lot of folks who are grazing on public lands. And are there sort of certain height requirements about flight related to drones?
Yes, those are great questions. So commercial pilots, anyone flying drones professionally, are basic without a waiver from the FAA is 400 feet above ground level. That's our max limit on flying. With special permission, we can fly above, and clearly to avoid a collision with another aircraft, we can fly above that. But you do have to plan your acquisitions in steep, rugged country to make sure that you don't fly over 400 feet above ground level, because if there's a canyon in between the areas you want to fly, you would be out of regulation if you go above the 400 feet. So that's one of the rules. In terms of flying over other people's private land, it depends on what state you're in. Different states have different laws, and generally, if you are not a nuisance, if you're not flying into someone's backyard, like looking at their back deck with the drone, generally, there's sometimes some state laws that'll say you have to be at least 150 feet above their property. Some states have laws that protect drones from being shot down by landowners, because some people think it would be really fun. Like, I don't know whose drone that is. I'm just going to shoot it out of the sky. And I'm going to defer to state law on that. In Nevada, our only state law is that we can't fly within 400 feet of a power line without exemptions from the power company. And so I had a vineyard that I wanted to work with, but his entire vineyard was within 400 feet of a power line. So it just like paralleled the power line, and I was like, sorry, I'm not going to fly drones here. So it really depends on the laws and regulations. But over public lands, as long as we don't have an airport or some other airspace concern, I've been able to fly over any public lands in Nevada in terms of federally managed BLM Forest Service lands. Our state parks, generally state parks do have bans on drones, national parks as well, because they can be a nuisance for people enjoying the scenery. And so I have a state park that I want to count horses on, and I have to have special permission. Thank you.
Tracy, thank you so much. Thanks for closing us out.